I was here 65, 66, 67. 68 I did my dip ed, and that was half between here and the old Teachers College in Union Street. So I had 4 years here. The dip ed was a sort of a 50-50 split between the two institutions. But 65 I was over at Tyers Hill, and 66 was the first year that this operated, and so I was here in 66 and 67. I did a Bachelor of Arts, and the requirements for that, you had to do 9 subjects over 3 years. So your first year you did 4, second year you did 3, and the third year was a terrific bludge, it was 2 subjects. So doing an arts degree, I was on a Teachers College scholarship, and I was only 17 when I started. I did psychology, as everyone did. Everyone was going to be a psychologist. History, economics and geography. In the first year I dropped psychology. The second year I dropped economics, and the third year was history and geography.
That third year sounds mighty interesting. As you say, it was a nice cruisy time with only 2 subjects to work on. Yeah. Was there plenty of there would have been plenty of downtime. What did you guys and the students get up to around here at that time?
One of the great decisions, when we quit over at Tyers Hill in 65, one of the huge decisions to be made when we came over here was to be the Hallshaven or the Shortland Hotel. The Shortland Hotel won, and a lot of downtime was spent there. There's none of these luxuries as Camp Bar on the Hill or the Union. We didn't have those facilities, so being young blokes, and you decided you'd go to the pub. And one of the great things was a Friday in the third year, I think we had a lecture at 9 and then a lecture at 5 with all that free time in the middle. So it was a geography lecture. I remember the fellow called old Doc Jarrett, and he used to get quite amused at blokes falling asleep and vomiting in his lectures. It was, yeah, but he didn't have a sense of humour, Doc Jarrett. And I actually have some of my notes. I kept, being anal, I kept a lot of my university notes, and I've looked over them over the years, and to see this progressive decline in legibility of my notes is, you know, those Fridays lectures, it's just ludicrous. Yeah, so a lot of the downtime was spent at the pub.
So the 5 o'clock lecture, how did you go in it?
Oh, terribly. I passed the subject, but I don't think old Doc Jarrett liked me. But and I wasn't the worst. But blokes would be falling in the fountains, and as they'd come back from the pub. But yeah, that wasn't every day, but it was quite frequent. Yep. Yeah.
Do you, apart from the Doc Jarrett, any other teachers or professors you remember fondly?
Oh, there was a lot of them in the first year. Professor Cranfield. We had our psychology lecture on about the 3rd floor, and he was a large gentleman. And by the time he got up, there's no lifts, and it was over at the old tech college, and he'd have to walk up 3 flights of stairs, and he always struggled. So the first 15 minutes there was a lot of recovering. Occy, the students just love Professor Occhietti, who was the Vice-Chancellor, and they just referred to him as Occy, and he was at every rugby match, and he was good. Professor Bryn Newton-John, he was the Vice-Chancellor, and everyone loved his daughter, Olivia. Professor Tweedy, who was the head of geography. You know, my main area was geography and history, and old Prof Tweedy. Greg McMinn was a history lecturer of a very school teacherish mode. A lot of the lecturers played in a cricket side with the university, and myself and all my mates were cricketers, and they played in a 4th grade number 3, and they called themselves the Venerable Gentlemen. So they were quite sociable sorts of people. There was, you know, you knew most of them, and most of them would say good day. Probably the standout of everyone will say this was Godfrey Tanner, the professor of classics, and we'd never struck anyone like Godfrey. As I said, we'd come to uni as a 17-year-old, just fresh out of school, and I remember the first uni dance that we had at the old Union at the Teachers College. Here's Godfrey up on stage with a toilet seat round his neck and a pair of shorts on and academic gowns. And Godfrey was a classics person. He was in everything, and he was everyone's friend. And you know, you remember Godfrey very fondly. Harry Bradford was another. He was the amenities officer at the university, and you know, being a cricket and a rugby player had a lot to do with Harry Bradford. But yeah, there were lots of them, and most of them weren't daunting, and most of them were quite friendly. Jim Staines was in psychology. That's about my recollection of them. Yeah.
What did uni do for you? Did you get on? So you've passed your set courses?
Yes.
And did you get on to do what you wanted to do?
I did.
What became of Michael McEntyre, the 17, or let's say 22, 23-year-old when he left?
I always wanted to be a teacher. And a degree to me was a ticket to do that. I did that. I got out. I got my first appointment, Coonamble High School. Despite being a geographer, my reaction, where on earth is Coonamble? I soon found out. So I basically had 38 years with the Department of Education. I ended up as a principal. At Coonabarabran High, a beautiful country school, very close to Coonamble actually. I had recipient of a number of Department of Education fellowships where I studied overseas. I was awarded an OAM, the Order of Australia Medal, when I finished teaching. I retired at the age of 60 and terrific, just absolutely loved teaching. I suppose one of the odd ones that, I did love it, and I'd say to the kids, the staff, they're all good kids, some are just better than others. And so I did really love teaching. When I retired from that, I took up a job with the Knights, Newcastle Knights, for 6 years as the recruitment and welfare manager, which morphed into a title called Executive Manager Human Resources. And I left there shortly after the Tinkler people came. I was tied up with coaching rugby league right through my school career. I ended up coaching both New South Wales for 5 years, and I coached the Australian schoolboys for 3 years. So I had a pretty rewarding career, and looking back, I wouldn't have done anything else.
You've done exceptionally well. Is there anyone else that you can think of? Was there anyone that went through university with you that went on to become a famous role, someone that we would know? Did anyone come on to discover a planet or become a...
I think Bernie Curran became fairly important, didn't he? Yes, I went through with... Bernie was a couple of years ahead of me, but I had a lot to do with Bernie through there, and I know he's very prominent in the university now. A lot of people, Darryl Williamson, Alan Hare. I don't quite know. Ted Campbell, for example, was the general manager of Port Stephens and had some very, very high-ranking things. But I don't think anyone stood out like becoming international.
Yes.
Because it was a very limited sort of time at the university. There was really only 3 groups of students that were there. There were those from the industries on cadetships at the BHP and the associated industries who were doing engineering and science degrees. There were those who were sort of like cadetships with different accounting firms around town who predominantly did commerce degrees. And there were us who were on scholarships from the Department of Education who basically went into teaching. There didn't seem to be a lot of private students funding their own way. There were a few who came from reasonably wealthy families and basically got out after the first year because it was cards and beer for a lot of them. And there were very few international students, as they're referred to now. That wasn't the title they were given then, but it was interesting walking in here today, the number of international students who are around here. But realistically, there was a fairly narrow focus on degrees, and there wasn't the diversity of things that you can do today. It was a reasonably small place, and you tended to know most people.
I was just thinking that when you said that from when you were here, so from 50 years ago to today, how different is this campus?
Oh, it's amazing. When I was 66, this opened, and there was the B01, I think it was the main lecture theatre, and there was the other main wraparound building up there, and I think the science building was here as well. And that there may have been an engineering building. I don't even know if they're still here. There was no union here in 66. The only facility was like a pie van, a steak sandwich van, which was pretty well located about where this building is here now, which you'd go at lunchtime and you'd buy a steak sandwich and you could buy a drink there, but that was pretty much the only facility. The Oval opened in 66, so you did have the University No. 1 Oval, but I don't recall any other ovals being here. There was that squash court facility there, but it was just wide open space. I'd done my leaving certificate in 64 at Jesmond High, which is now Callaghan Campus over the road, so We were quite familiar with the area, but there was very, very little here. And as I said, you'd go to the Shortland Hotel and walk back through the bush, and it was pretty well bush.
Were the mosquitoes here then?
Mosquitoes were terrible. That's the thing I neglected to say. You'd walk down here to the pie van or the steak sandwich van, and you would get absolutely smashed by the mosquitoes. They were ferocious.
Nothing's changed.
They're probably the descendants of those terrorising people now.
Just getting bigger.
Yeah.
So as all university students at some point tend to, there's always a cause. There's always something happening. Give me a bit of... I'm going to use the word dirt, but there's got to be something that is there something that you were ever involved in?
Well, probably every second. I was on a scholarship and I got £5 a week, in which Mr. Menzies took 2 shillings a week, so we were getting £4.18 a week, which wasn't a lot of money, but you made do. You supplemented your income by working at the BHP in the coke ovens or the cinder plant every Christmas holidays, and that was your sort of little luxury thing. But every second Wednesday was payday, and I remember the place of choice in the first year was the Cross Keys Hotel. So every second Wednesday on payday, you would find many of the students would spend their time at the Cross Keys and then walk back across the drain pipe back to the university. So you could say that happened fairly regularly, but there were some fairly major incidents. There was the famous siege of Maitland Road, where someone decided that they wanted traffic lights out the front to save the students as they were wandering across. So that turned into a major demonstration, and I put those things along to show you, where they decided firstly they'd sit down and stop the cars, and then some bright sparks, once the cars were stopped, decided to get the fire hoses out and do that. That brought about 4 paddy load wagons of police to the scene, and it got front page in the Sun, the Newcastle Sun, that night, and also the Herald the next day. So they turned the fire hoses on the cars. Then they decided that a terrific idea would be to let the tyres of the police vans down, and one student did that. And there's I know the bloke personally, unfortunately he's deceased now, but he let the tyres down, and they caught him and put him in the back of the paddy wagon. So it got fairly unfavourable press for a number of days, and it was the old, all students are educated idiots, and wasn't well accepted by the general community, but it was quite interesting to be a participant in. That was one. There was another one same year, I think it was the First Autonomy Day, or a day celebrating it, when we're in town. They decided to storm Fort Scratchley for some reason. Fort Scratchley at the time was still occupied by army people. So you climbed up that precipitous facing, ocean facing slope. I think it's a very, very steep slope, and climbed over the barbed wire fence and got in there, and then realised that the gates at the front of the fort were open anyhow, so there was no need to do that. Another one was in '66, where again it was an Autonomy Day event, or a post-Autonomy Day event. It was at Wallsend, and this again drew very unfavourable media, where the students broke up a hall. There was a hall out there, the Masonic Hall at Wallsend. It was just up the road from the Colliery Inn. So after an afternoon and evening of alcohol, they decided that they would do damage to the hall. That was terribly unfavourably received, because the uni at the time was appealing to the public for assistance to build the Great Hall. I think it was $1 a brick or something, you could do it. So, and there was all the famous lines of they're trying to build a hall, but they're tearing others down, and et cetera, et cetera. That was stupid and vandalism, but and there was a lot of fear among a lot of the blokes who were involved in it that they were going to get sent down at the time. So it again received fairly unfavourable, deserved press. I don't know if they still have the university paper called Opus, do they? Is that it still comes out? Yeah. Well, there was a couple of editors of that. They decided on the last issue in 1965 that they would just see how closely people were reading it. And the editorial, the first letter of each sentence was, "Opus says get thingy, and you just had to read down there, but nobody had noticed it. So they then went and got the things back and cut them out so that people would then say, I wonder what that was. So it was, over the years, we'll trial for you, pitted our wits up to our neck in filth and something, so you poor fools. So as Opus says, yeah. So no one cottoned on to it till they actually clipped it out and distributed it, and then everyone put it together. So, yeah, so the two editors of that got into a little bit of trouble, but they weren't editors in 1966.
Would you change anything for yourself? Your days here, good days?
Days here were terrific, yeah. As I said, straight from school into this, and you were always a little bit daunted, I suppose, initially, but no, wouldn't have changed anything here at uni. It was, it was pretty hard the first year. You were catching a bus, you didn't have a car. Only way you got a car was you worked, as I said, at the BHP in the holidays, and you bought a car. So your second year there, you'd get off the bus stop early because it'd save you threepence. But no, it's the days at uni were terrific, and then you hit the real world, and it was good.